The amount of rest you take between your sets can have an impact on your gains. So by the end of this video, you'll know exactly what the best amount of rest is for you specifically. If you ever search the internet for an answer to this, then just like people asking if I'm actually fit in real life, you'd realize that finding a concrete answer can be tricky. Thing is, resting between sets, also known as interset rest intervals, is quite a well-researched topic. But as we often see in science, the answer to what's best has changed over time. Not too long ago, 60 seconds of rest was considered the absolute best for gains in both muscle and strength. Later on, we shifted to shorter rest for muscle gains, but longer rest for strength gains. And today, the science seems to suggest that both muscle and strength actually benefit from more rest. However, plenty of our fellow bros and broettes still follow some of the older recommendations or even have their own unique approach, creating quite a bit of noise around this topic. So what then exactly is the true best amount of rest between sets for you specifically? To answer this, we first got to know how much of a difference in gains longer rest periods provide over shorter rest. Now, there isn't a whole lot of data when it comes to strength gains, but there is a 2016 study by Schoenfeld and colleagues that's perhaps the most famous paper proponents of longer rest intervals tend to cite. In the study, it was found that resting 3 minutes between sets was significantly superior to resting for just 1 minute, with effect sizes for longer rest more than doubling that of shorter rest. For muscle growth, the data is a lot more robust. And luckily for us, there's also a recent 2024 systematic review that did a decent job summarizing the scientific literature for this very topic. In this review, the researchers did find a small hypertrophic benefit with rest periods of 60 seconds or more compared to resting less than 60 seconds. On top of that, they could not conclude that resting for more than 90 seconds leads to any further benefits. So overall, there's no doubt that more rest is better than less, especially for strength. That said, I'd say that we can still make the argument that resting longer is not always the best option. Sure, if you're a pro athlete or bodybuilder, you definitely want to squeeze every single amount of gains you can. But for us regular folks, we really gotta think about the extra time needed with resting more. Let's say that we do rest 3 minutes between each set. If we actually calculate that for, say, a basic 5-exercise 20-set workout, we'll have to dedicate roughly 45 minutes of our session entirely to just resting. Imagine having to rest that long when you only have like an hour at the gym. We're essentially left with only 15 minutes to actually train, and we still gotta squeeze in warm-ups, transitions between exercises, and most importantly, setting up our selfie tripods. Needless to say, this is just not very practical for most people. So instead of this, I think what might be best for most is to actually use both shorter and longer rest periods. And to determine when to use one or the other, we simply gotta look at two things. One, the difficulty of the sets, and two, the muscles used in the sets. For the most part, the more difficult or more effort you put into a set, the more rest you'll need for the next set. More specifically, the heavier the weights you lift or the closer to failure you reach, which both create significant fatigue, the more rest you need. The same thing applies with the more muscles used in an exercise. This generally means that for multi-joint compound exercises that use multiple muscle groups like squats and bench presses, more rest is best. For those single joint isolation exercises like bicep curls and knee extensions, less rest should be fine. Again, it's a matter of fatigue, more muscles used, more fatigue, more rest. So with these two factors in mind, you should know exactly when shorter rest periods of 60 seconds or less is fine, and when longer rest periods of 1 to 3 minutes, maybe even 5, might be best. Well, at least after you consider one more thing, and that is, of course, your goals. For muscle growth, as we saw from the research, it's not too affected by rest periods. So if you want to specifically build muscle, resting less for all your sets, even for compounds or sets taken to failure, you likely won't miss out on too much gains. But for strength, we do want to consider more rest of about 2 minutes or more for each set tailored specifically for strength adaptations. Now, there's also the matter of conditioning. Some research showed that we can actually adapt to using shorter rest periods to the point that the difference in gains between between less and more rest becomes a lot smaller. This is not a heavily researched topic, but it does make sense mechanistically. Shorter rest periods lead to higher muscle overload, which then leads to greater metabolic responses and adaptations that can improve muscle conditioning. So using shorter rest periods might actually provide a benefit that outweighs the benefit of longer rest periods in the long run, but we'll have to wait for more research to really know this. Overall, as you can see, it's quite reasonable to use a combination of shorter and longer rest periods. But personally, I actually prefer a bit of a different approach. An approach that relies on intuition. The point of resting is to allow our physical and mental state to recover. But really, there's no fixed amount of rest that works the same for everyone. And in many ways, we can kind of tell if we have rested enough to start our next set based on our own intuition. We can get a feel for our exhaustion level, our muscle sensations, our mental state, and even our breathing pattern. And we can then start our next set when these things feel good enough. Now, obviously, actually understanding our bodies to this extent takes a bit of experience. Beginners probably don't want to rely on intuition just yet and stick with the fixed durations. But what's great about the strategy is that the science somewhat supports it. Some research showed that people choosing their own rest intervals were able to perform just as well as people using fixed rest intervals. However, the research also showed that these people did rest for a lot longer. Fortunately, this is where the second part of my personal strategy comes in. And it's simply combining intuition with fixed durations. More specifically, I can choose when to start my next set so long as I rest at least 1 minute but no more than 3 minutes. With this strategy, I have a fixed duration on both ends, 1 and 3 minutes, while leaving some wiggle room for intuition to make the final call. Using this allows me to save a lot more time compared to the time I use longer rest periods for almost everything. And it still allows me to get enough rest for virtually every exercise I do, barring some really tough stuff like 15 plus rep squats, or when I need more time to come up with something to blame for missing my deadlift PR again other than myself. I've done this long enough that now I can even predict how much rest I'll need immediately after finishing a set, which allows me to just concentrate and prepare for the next set. I definitely recommend giving this strategy a shot, given that you do feel confident about relying on your intuition. Also, you might benefit from a different rest range compared to mine. Maybe sometimes you're fine with just 30 seconds of rest, or sometimes you need more than 3 minutes. That'll be up to you to decide. But I do think it's very effective, and fortunately, it does make sense in both the scientific and practical sense. In the end of the day, choosing how much you rest between your sets doesn't have to be super complicated. And even though the best gains do come with more rest, if used properly, less rest can be plenty fine as well. If you enjoyed this video, then please give it a restful thumbs up and share it with your set-loving friends. Subscribe for more and let me know what you think about resting between sets in the comments. As always, thank you for watching, and don't forget to get your protein.